Here is Leon Bibb with the story of a child who simply vanished, almost within sight of her own home.
On August 24, 1951, 10-year-old Beverly Rose Potts was looking forward to spending the evening with her best friend and neighbor, 11-year-old Patsy Swing. Despite grounding their daughter for coming in late on a previous recent occasion, Beverly's parents, Robert and Elizabeth, née Truer Potts, had relented for that evening alone, because, much to Patsy's delight, the local park was holding a Schauagen, an event where local children could showcase their performing skills on a stage in front of an audience of friends, neighbors, and others who lived in or traveled to the vicinity. The young girl loved music and dance. With a mother who had worked as a singer and dancer and a father who still worked at downtown Cleveland's Allen Theater as a stagehand, the performing arts were very much a part of her life, and she couldn't wait to enjoy the spectacle. Beverly's parents had given her permission to stay at the showcase until it was over, but when 10 p.m. rolled around and their daughter was still not home, the couple began to worry. A worry which escalated when they discovered that Patsy had returned home alone at least an hour earlier. 10-year-old Beverly was never seen again. Beverly Rose Potts was born on April 15, 1941, a second daughter to her parents who called her their miracle child. Born 12 years after the Potts' first baby, Anita, Beverly arrived 2 months early and was given the nickname Rosebud by her mother because of her delicate pink appearance. Despite the age difference between the siblings, Anita adored her little sister. Indeed, the family as a whole was extremely close. The Potts family lived in a modest but comfortable home on Linnet Avenue on Cleveland's west side. Mr. Potts, who was of English, Irish, and Scottish descent, had bought the house in 1927, where he lived with his wife and later his 2 daughters. The house was situated in a largely Eastern European neighborhood. Mrs. Potts herself originated from Hungary, where families would look out for each other and keep a watchful eye on the children who lived there. It was the epitome of "it takes a village to raise a child." Despite the safety of living in a close-knit community, though, there were concerns regarding the nearby Halloran Park. Opened in 1945, the park was popular with children and young families, as it was the only large space for families for miles around. However, parents would ensure their children had left the park by late afternoon, as it had a reputation for attracting vagrants. There were plenty of places for undesirables to hide in the park at night too, as the trees which lined the park were very effective at blocking street lights, leaving the park in shadow. More worryingly, in the months before the Schauagen event, there had been at least 2 reported sexual assaults in the park, along with nuisance behavior, including things like groping and inappropriate comments. Beverly was known in the local community as a sensible child, with teachers and family members alike noting how shy and well-behaved she was. Neighbors often asked her to babysit their own children, and she was known for walking little ones to kindergarten. Not much is known about the young girl's early childhood. She had a happy home life, got on well with her sister, loved her parents, and had good friends. She was also an intelligent child who consistently got B grades at Louis Agassiz Elementary School and was excited to be moving up to 5th grade in the fall. Beverly's appearance could be deceptive. At 10 years old, she could easily be mistaken for a child a couple of years older due to being tall for her age, but in all other respects, she was a typical 10-year-old who enjoyed playing with dolls, riding her bicycle, and playing in the park. Like all children, though, Beverly was starting to grow up, and shortly after her 10th birthday, she asked her mother if she could have her hair cut from the long blonde braids she usually wore to a more fashionable, shorter bob style with bangs. While Elizabeth initially refused, she finally gave in a month or 2 later, and Beverly got the haircut of her dreams. If the child did have a flaw, though, it was her habit of coming home later than her curfew dictated. Just a few days prior to her disappearance, Beverly had lost track of time and returned home with her cousin, Amber Lathan, later than expected. This led to Beverly being grounded, and initially, this grounding extended to the upcoming Schauagen in Halloran Park. Elizabeth relented, though, because she knew how excited Beverly was about going to the event, and she didn't want her missing out on the much-anticipated extravaganza. It was a decision that would haunt the mother for the rest of her life. With the exception of the nearby Halloran Park, the Potts neighborhood was considered a safe place for children to be. Nevertheless, Elizabeth Potts went to great lengths to teach her daughter about stranger danger and warned her repeatedly to be wary of strange men and to never get into a car with other people. As Beverly was such a shy child, those who knew her were confident that she would never be persuaded to go with someone she didn't know or feel safe with. In fact, Beverly had fled to her home on at least one occasion when she thought she was being followed, and was too shy to speak to a boy her friends said she had a crush on. Still, Elizabeth Potts insisted that her daughter could only go to the show again if she was with her best friend, Patsy. Normally, Beverly would have had orders to return home before dark, but she begged to be allowed to stay until the end. As the park was only around a quarter of a mile from the Potts' house, and Beverly would be with her best friend, Elizabeth relented and told her excited daughter that yes, she could stay until the end as long as she came home immediately afterwards. Unbeknown to Elizabeth, though, Patsy had been told to be home before dark, meaning her curfew was earlier than Beverly's. On the evening of August 24th, once the family meal had been finished and the dishes washed, Beverly called for her friend next door while her parents settled down in front of the TV to watch a baseball game. The two pals rode their bicycles to Halloran Park, arriving just after 7 p.m. The event attracted a huge crowd, though, and by 7:30 p.m. it became clear that trying to maneuver their bicycles through the huge crowds would be impossible. As the park was so close to home, the friends rode back to their respective houses and returned to the show again on foot, arriving a little after 8 p.m. Mindful of her parents' wishes, Patsy urged Beverly to leave the event at around 8:40 p.m. as night was beginning to fall. Patsy didn't want to leave without her friend, but Beverly insisted she was allowed to stay until the end, so after exchanging a few words, Patsy returned home alone. Looking back and probably hoping her friend would follow her, Patsy saw Beverly entranced by the entertainers on stage, although she later claimed to have seen a woman standing next to Beverly with her hand on the child's shoulder. It was the last time the 11-year-old ever saw her friend. By 9:45 p.m. the show had reached its conclusion, and the crowds quickly dispersed. By 10 p.m. though, Beverly had still not returned, and the Potts family began to worry. Knowing that Beverly had spent the evening with Patsy, Beverly's sister, Anita, contacted her neighbors to inquire about Beverly's whereabouts. When she discovered that Patsy had arrived home an hour ago and had left Beverly at the park, Anita and her father immediately began searching the area and contacting any of Beverly's friends in case they had seen her since Patsy had returned home alone. None of them had. After around an hour's searching, the Potts family realized that this was something more than their daughter simply losing track of time, and they called the police. The investigation. The police arrived shortly after midnight and immediately searched the Potts' house in case Beverly was hiding. Having ascertained that the girl was nowhere in the building, the police then looked more closely at Beverly's room and her belongings, working on the possibility that she had run away from home. Beverly's piggy bank was untouched, and the only clothes that were missing were the ones she had worn to the show again. Furthermore, her bicycle was where she had left it when the two friends decided to ride home and return to the event on foot. It was clear that Beverly had not intentionally left her home and family, and by the morning of August 25th, a manhunt was underway. Headed by Detective Chief James MacArthur, a team of 45 full-time officers were assigned to the case, along with more than 1,000 volunteers who helped out in the physical searches. It was a huge undertaking, which saw Civil Air Patrol planes searching from the sky, while any bodies of water in the area were searched and dragged for any clues to Beverly's whereabouts. Door-to-door inquiries were made, albeit not until mid-September, and several suspects were interviewed and released without charge. Of course, Beverly's own family members came under the spotlight very early on, but both Elizabeth and Robert, along with Anita, agreed to polygraph testing to prove their innocence. All three passed with flying colors. Suspects. There had been around 1,500 people at the Shawinigan event, and several people came forward with information and/or sightings of Beverly. George Varell, an off-duty police officer, reported seeing two men in their late teens or very early 20s ogling young girls during the performances. According to Mr. Varell, the pair disappeared behind the stage as the show was coming to an end, and he didn't see them again after that. A classmate of Beverly's, Patricia Nag, told police that a young man had been acting inappropriately during the show too, by thrusting his hips backwards and forwards in a manner that suggested sexual intercourse. Nothing came of these reports, and the men involved were never traced. However, on August 29th, it seemed that a breakthrough had been made in the case. Police had arrested 25-year-old William Slates. Unemployed and an ex-serviceman, Slates lived nearby with his mother and had been arrested 2 years before for sexually approaching an 8-year-old girl. So he was already on the police's radar and seemed a good fit for Beverly's disappearance. Adding credibility to the possibility that the man was involved in Beverly's disappearance, a neighbor told police that Slates had suddenly boarded up his house on West 116th Street the day after the disappearance and fled the area in a friend's borrowed car. It didn't take the police long to find him in a motel in Columbus, and he was brought back for questioning. Despite the fact that he failed a polygraph when asked about Beverly, and 2 of his friends couldn't get their stories straight regarding his movements on the evening of the disappearance, Slates was released without charge when his 17-year-old girlfriend told police he had been with her when the child was abducted. A $1,500 reward was offered by Mr. Potts's union, which attracted thousands of calls. Some were considered credible and duly followed up, while a great many were found to be hoaxes. Either way, the police were no closer to finding Beverly's abductor and, as was now strongly suspected, her killer. For a friendly, safe neighborhood, several disturbing stories came out of the investigation. 3 months prior to Beverly's disappearance, a 5-year-old girl named Gail Ann Michelle had been taken from a local store and discovered unharmed 18 hours later. At around the same time, in May 1951, 2 young girls had been subjected to a sexual assault in Halloran Park, and 3 women had been sexually assaulted in close proximity to the Potts' house. On August 26th, 65 sex offenders from the local area were questioned, and every one of them was eliminated from the inquiry. It was a frustrating time for Inspector James MacArthur. Despite some positive leads, they were no closer to finding Beverly or her abductor. Her family made a public appeal a week after Beverly disappeared, stating that they now accepted that she was no longer alive, and begging the person or persons responsible to return the little girl's body so she could at least have a decent Christian burial. There was no response. Possible leads. There were points in the investigation which gave hope to the police of closing the case. In early September 1951, a man named Henry Palmer saw a body-shaped bundle floating in the Cuyahoga River, and even noted seeing human hands and feet sticking out from the package. Incredibly, another witness, Mrs. Ada Scoven, also reported seeing a rope-bound body floating in the same stretch of river. These reports were made independently of each other, and the riverbed was dragged for signs of the body. Despite an extensive search, the body was never found. While the investigation remained very much open, the number of officers assigned to the case began to decrease. The police had exhausted every lead they had. Nearly 3,000 potential sightings and suspects had been checked by April 1952, and every single one of the 1,200-plus suspects had been interviewed and eliminated. A further 500 vehicles, which had been reported as being in or near Halloran Park, had been traced and ruled out. Leads petered out until 1954, when an investigation into pornographic photographs uncovered a photo of a young girl who bore a striking resemblance to Beverly. Even her family agreed that it looked like her, although they later changed their minds about the similarities. It was yet another lead which never came to fruition. The investigation stalled until 1973, when a woman who claimed she was a childhood friend of Beverly contacted police and told them that the little girl's body could be found in a grease pit of an auto repair shop. The place was searched, but there was no trace of Beverly. Then in 1974, it seemed as if the case would be solved. A local attorney told police that the brother of a client had confessed to abducting little Beverly. The man was arrested and questioned extensively, but while he admitted having a predilection for young girls and molesting them, he said he couldn't specifically remember Beverly, although he did say that somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered something about a girl with the same name. He also admitted being in the area of Halloran Park at the time of the disappearance. Detectives James Furst and Robert Shanklin were convinced they had found the abductor, but with a lack of real evidence, the county prosecutor's office dropped the case, and the man was released. It was widely accepted that Beverly had been taken against her will. As a shy child with a clear understanding of stranger danger, it was impossible to conceive that she had gone willingly with a stranger. And yet it seems impossible, or at least implausible, that she could be taken from a busy, crowded event against her will, without anyone noticing. There had been sightings of Beverly throughout the evening. 13-year-old Fred Crouch remembered almost colliding with Beverly when he rode past her heading towards the exit at around 9:30 p.m. to 9:45 p.m. Other witnesses remembered seeing a girl matching Beverly's description at around 9:15 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., talking to two men as they sat in their car, which was described as a dark-colored 37 or 38 Dodge Coupe. Given that Beverly was known as an extremely shy child, would she be talking to strangers, especially men? Due to the number of hoax calls the Potts family received, they were forced to disconnect their phone. But in the November following his daughter's disappearance, Mr. Potts received a call at work from a man who demanded to know why the Potts' home phone number had been disconnected. The caller, Frank Dale Davis, demanded $25,000 in exchange for Beverly, whom he claimed was extremely sick, but still alive. Davis realized the trap had been set when a male detective dressed up as Elizabeth Potts to deliver the ransom money, and the suspect fled the scene. When caught, he admitted he had been lying and had just seen an opportunity to make some easy money to pay off debts. While Davis had nothing to do with Beverly's abduction, he was nevertheless convicted of fraud and sent to prison for 5 years. The calls kept on coming, but each one was investigated and dismissed as a hoax, raising and then dashing the hopes of all involved. There was talk of Beverly being hit by a car. A local speed queen named Barbara Saunders lent her hot rod to her boyfriend's brother and his friends, who allegedly called her in a panic, telling her they had had an accident on West 117th Street and had to ditch the car. When Barbara went to find her car the next day, she discovered it had traces of blood on the bumper and blonde hair caught in the door. Police did their due diligence and searched the car and area, even digging up the ground where the car was abandoned, but the story was ultimately dismissed as it was not feasible that a 10-year-old girl could have been hit on a busy street and then taken away without witnesses seeing or hearing anything. More theories emerged, including one that Beverly was abducted by a carnival worker with the Shawinigan, but the event had nothing to do with travelers and was a joint venture by the City Recreation Department and the Cleveland Press, so Beverly would have known many of the performers and staff as it was a locally run event. However, a former Ferris wheel worker named William Henry Redmond did come under suspicion for Beverly's disappearance. With brutal sexual assaults going back to when he had just entered his teens, Redmond was strongly implicated in the murders of several young girls. But it wasn't until 1988 that he was found living in Nebraska, having fled there after an 8-year-old girl was tragically found strangled to death with Redmond's fingerprints on and around her. He never admitted or denied any involvement with Beverly, though, and there was no evidence that he was in the vicinity on the night Beverly disappeared. Then, in 1994, a letter was unearthed from under a carpet at a house in Cleveland. In it, a woman wrote that her husband was responsible for Beverly's death, and that she had seen him disposing of the body in a furnace. It seemed like the first big break the police had had, but when the woman was tracked down, she claimed that she had written the letter as a form of revenge against a husband she was divorcing, and that she had made it all up. The man by this time was deceased, and the woman was in her 80s. When questioned, the couple's children admitted that their father could be abusive, but that he would never have killed a child. In April 2000, the police received a letter through a Cleveland newspaper called The Plain Dealer, which contained a confession to the murder of Beverly Potts. In it, the author claimed to be an elderly man who was dying, although the letter was unsigned and contained no way to identify the suspect. Over the course of the next year or so, 2 more letters were received by the police, in which the man revealed information about Beverly, including the promise that he would send a coin, which Beverly had had in her possession, on the night she was abducted. This struck a chord because Beverly had been given a nickel by her mother on the evening of the Shogun, although there were also claims that the same coin had been found in Beverly's bedroom after she went missing. The 3rd letter contained a promise that the suspect would hand himself in at Halloran Park at midday on August 21, 2001, the 50th anniversary of Beverly's disappearance. Finally, it seemed as if the 50-year-old mystery would be solved, and while it would be too late to bring any kind of closure to Beverly's mother, who died in 1956, and her father, who passed away in 1970, it would bring some kind of peace to Anita, Beverly's sister. The 4th and final letter was received in August 2001, shortly before the anniversary and the promised surrender, dashing all hopes of bringing the case to a close. The anonymous writer told police that his health was in serious decline and he had been moved to a nursing home, so he would no longer be handing himself in. While police and the press claimed that the letters had been an elaborate hoax, it remains the thing that most likely happened to Beverly Potts. Without knowing the man's identity, it's hard to say whether the child knew him or not. It seems very unlikely that she would have gone willingly with an unknown man, and would have been heard or seen struggling if she felt threatened by a stranger. It would also be a strange kind of hoax for an elderly man to confess to a crime he didn't commit half a century later. Beverly would be in her late 80s at the time of writing, and even if she was abducted and survived, it's reasonable to assume that she would no longer be alive. Her sister Anita succumbed to cancer in 2006, having dedicated her life to searching for her adored sibling. Beverly's parents are buried in West Park Cemetery, Ohio, and a memorial stone dedicated to Beverly has been placed alongside her parents' graves. Unveiling the stone in 1991, Anita made the proviso that, should Beverly ever be discovered, she should be buried beneath the stone, reunited with her parents once more.